The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
It is 7 minutes after 8. Welcome to the Forum at 8 here on SFM, South Africa's news and information leader. This morning we're looking at the Democratic Alliance politics now. Over the weekend they had a provincial congress here in Gauteng, elected new leaders. In fact, John Moody and Mike Moriarty are now going to be leading the party here in Gauteng. John Moody being the provincial leader and Moriarty being the chairperson. But among other things that came out, of course, is that now they have their sight set on taking over Gauteng from the ANC. That's only in 2 years' time. They say that they think Gauteng is a strategic province in their effort to govern South Africa. We are looking at that then and are saying, is that possible? Is that pie in the sky? Is that just dreaming? Can the DA mobilize meaningful support and take over Gauteng from the ANC in 2 years' time? Already there are lots of Facebook posts about that and SMSs. In fact, there's Donald in Tembisa who sent us an SMS saying that I don't think the DA will ever win in Gauteng. I just don't think so. That's Donald in Tembisa. An email as well came through a while ago from Cuma Emlazi, who says DA will only win Gauteng in their dreams. Also, Comfort Maksaka on Facebook says they are daydreaming. Gauteng was the heart of it all, and the ANC did much to resolve the balances of the past. The fact that the DA won mid-val is not guaranteed that they will win Gauteng. Masilonyan Mushweshwa says the gap is too narrow between the two already in Gauteng. ANC has committed enough blunders to constitute a self-destruction mechanism, but this will remain DA's dream for a while. DA is still too white to convince us that they are all embracing. Miriam Muleko says if they can start dealing with and admitting that there's racism in Cape Town, maybe we'll consider voting for them. They start taking service delivery to the township, especially in Khayelitsha. They will start shooting our right eye when we protest. Mzama Mkwanaze says, I think 2 years might be just too ambitious. Ernest Mabusela says, at times we must let people dream beyond their dreaming capacity. Simon Sibanda says, with this e-tolling thing and considering the fact that the ANC doesn't enjoy overwhelming support in Gauteng, the DA can pose a serious challenge on the ANC. Chris Heathcote says, if the ANC continues stuffing up, surely the DA can. Tembani Bungani says, ANC has not failed much in Gauteng and the history of the party lays there. These are some of the Facebook comments that we've received so far. Would like to take more of your comments then on email. Send me an email at gwalax@sabc.co.za this morning, gwalax@sabc.co.za, but also send us an SMS at 34701. 34701. Each SMS will cost you 2 Rand. 34701. We'll also be taking calls a little later on at 0891 104 208, 0891 104 208. All right then, at 10 minutes after 8, let me introduce my guest here in the studio. I'm joined by Mr. Ralph Matekga. He's an independent political analyst. Ralph, good morning to you. Nice having you again this morning.
Good morning.
And we are waiting for Mr. Mmusi Maimane, who speaks on behalf of the DA. Now, he has been at the SABC for quite a while, but unfortunately he went to the wrong building and apparently has been waiting outside the wrong studios for all morning, waiting to come through. So in any minute now, I think actually 2 minutes or so, he's going to be here. But let me just so long ask Mr. Matekga then to respond to some of these SMSs. Clearly, a lot of people believe that the DA is daydreaming.
I think there is skepticism given the history of the DA and also the way in which people look at South African politics. But I don't think in principle it is unthinkable for the DA to indeed achieve what it set itself to achieve. Although it is more complicated than that. It's not going to be, for them they seems to have an idea of a linear shift where when voters are dissatisfied with the ANC, they will automatically therefore switch to the DA. I don't think that is how it's going to happen, and I don't think that's a workable model to think about it. But it's more complicated. It requires more work from the DA to be able to take voters from the ANC, because it seems their model, it's not really based on getting into the ANC constituencies and convincing ANC voters that they need to switch to the DA. But it looks as if, from what I read, it looks as if their aim is to sit and wait for disgruntled voters. That is, they are going to wait for the ANC to make mistakes, and therefore for voters to come to a realization that we have had enough of the ANC, therefore we can then switch to the DA. It takes quite a lot for voters to shift from one.
What does it take?
It takes convincing. Voters are not just consumers of passive service delivery, as the DA seems to think. It takes a lot of political mediation. And I think until the DA start to deal with the question of it positioning itself as a political home, it will not be able to make inroads in more significant level than it seems to be targeting.
What will that entail, though, for the DA to position itself as a political home? And generally, what does that mean?
It means to go beyond the idea of service delivery, because for them, they are looking at the question of service delivery, that where the ANC seems to fail when it comes to service delivery, that is sufficient to turn voters against the ANC. But I think there are more deeper issues around the question of race, for example. What political identity is the DA known for, and how does the DA deal with the question of race? Because when people think about political parties to vote for, they're also thinking as to whether does that political party provide a political home for me? Do I feel comfortable with the way they look at the question of race? Is the party realistic about the reality of race that people are even the way in which service delivery is being given along race? Is the party being aware of that, or is the party just scratching on the surface, punting itself as the party that will just provide service delivery without looking deeper into some of the structural confines that service delivery.
But as politics evolves in South Africa, does this concept of political home not move? Because some people may say, well, as politics evolve, voters also are moving away from this concept of political home and are voting on the basis of whether or not you can deliver.
It's not as simple as that, because if you look at the economic structure in South Africa, if you look at the distribution of opportunities in South Africa, it goes along the question of race. There are some structural problems that we have not been able to deal with. While people may look at the question of service delivery, and while they may express some of their immediate problems in the form of service delivery, when they go back to voting, there is much more deeper consideration as to exactly what is going to shape their decision to vote.
But what have we learned from the 2011 local government elections? Have we not learned that, one, the DA has made some gains simply because people are starting to say, well, I want my street clean, I want water flowing out of my tap, I want services.
The DA has made gain in relation to that. And also the ANC seems to have also lost, I think, about an average of 3% nationally in 2011 election, or just under that, out of the concern that the party keeps on talking the language, but it does not do the right thing. But still, that does not necessarily put the question of service delivery as a sole determinant as to how people vote in South Africa.
Let's welcome Mr. Mmusi Maimane, who speaks on behalf of the the DA. Is the national spokesperson there. Mr. Maimane, good morning. I believe that you got lost trying to find our studio.
I feel like saying good evening. I went to Radio Park. It's a different venue, and security is quite
And
tight.
that doesn't mean that the DA may very well get lost trying to find the voters necessary to take over Gauteng.
We have already found them. So
have you?
We have already. I think that the trajectory speaks for itself. We've seen, we've won a lot of by-elections of the ANC. I think that in all reality, when you look at Pretoria or Tshwane, as an example, you're sitting at about 39% in a local government vote. I think. And when you look at Gauteng and Johannesburg, that's 35. Those are two big metros in the city. I think the ANC is fully aware of the fact that they're below 60%, which is not common for the ANC. They've dipped below that. I think we mustn't also make the mistake of thinking that political change comes through incremental growth. So you grow by 2% now, you grow by 4% now. This is a political game. And in essence, a number of events take place that reshape the landscape of politics. And potentially change can come. And so I think we're feeling quietly optimistic in terms of the hard work that we're doing. I think that we've proven a model of government that seeks to deliver. And I think South African politics, the further we move away from 94, just on a timeline perspective, is when people are sitting and realizing that actually democracy is about putting bread on the table, putting lights on, making sure there's sanitation and all of those things.
Sure. But you see, it's interesting because I think those are two different philosophies. Then if you listen to what Ralph is saying, he's saying that the DA must be a political home, or at least must prove to be a political home. And you seem to be suggesting that people don't necessarily want a political home, but they want somebody who's going to put bread on the table. In other words, services are more important than a political home. Am I understanding you correctly?
No, I think it's a both-and argument. I think we're seeing significant numbers of people come across and join. Our membership roll is increasing, certainly here in Gauteng. I think it used to be uncommon to walk around the townships and see someone in a blue T-shirt. Now, it's become a fashionable thing. So even though people may not necessarily join, but I think they're mentally in their own headspace doing that. And I think also what we mustn't forget is that coming into 2014, you're getting 3 million new voters who perhaps have not voted in 94. And maybe for them, apartheid acts as a memory for them. I know a generation that lives today still experiences the effects of apartheid, so nobody can deny that fact. But there's a generation of voter who's coming on board, who's looking for a new home. So we can't just simply rely on the fact that there's a historic legacy on the table. There's a sense where these young people who are turning 18 for the first time will vote in 2014.
And I'm getting a sense that you're counting on these 3 million people, because what you need as the DA in order to win Gauteng, as I understand it, is 1 million voters. 1 million more than what you already have.
Sure.
So you're hoping that out of these 3, you will be able to get 1 million.
Certainly, and I think indicators are positive. As I say, I think Ekurhuleni, for argument's sake, did exceptionally well in terms of new voters coming on board. So we did Mogale City. So I think we're certainly within striking distance in terms of where things are. And Gauteng voters are learning that they need a new government. So we are dependent on the fact that these new voters that are coming on board, but we're doing hard work in terms of communities. You know, I was in Protea South about 2 days ago, and while I was there in Soweto, you're hearing people saying, actually, we want a change. We want a new difference. And so even amongst that generation of people, they're coming on board saying, we want to shift votes. So that's going to be the hard work going forward, is to ensure that in the entrenched structures where people are experiencing issues, they can move across.
But people will also be looking at Cape Town. And some of the Facebook posts that I've been reading here and some of the emails, people are looking at Cape Town and are saying, well, there are stories coming out of Cape Town, stories of racism, stories of exclusionism, stories of if you're rich, then you are looked after, but if you're poor, nobody cares about you. And those stories will count in Gauteng, don't you think?
Undeniably. But let me set the record straight. I think there is a propaganda machinery that seeks to say Cape Town is racist and other provinces are not, which is fascinating when you consider the fact that the inward migration in towards Cape Town from all races is at an all-time high. So people are preferring to live in what they're now calling this racist place. And more than anything, I think racism is an illness that is within our society. We must accept that fact. It's not resided exclusively in one place. It's a national footprint. But second to that, when you look at the delivery mechanisms in terms of that, let me cite one story. When you look at the Western Cape's education department, for the first time this year in the top 10, the schools that have outperformed, if you were to split them down into 5 quintiles, you discover that the schools that have outperformed any other are schools who are the poorest of the lot, who historically come from black communities. So you're finding that there's a lot of infrastructure built that is going into black communities. And in fact, our education system is proving that black schools are performing better. In fact, the increase in the Western Cape from where it is now to 82% actually emerges out of the fact that all our traditional black schools have done exceptionally well.
The argument about in-migration, and Ralph, I'm going to bring you in here. Some may say, well, maybe you're just pushing it, because the fact that it is racist does not mean that people won't go look for opportunities because of the reality of where they come from. If you're in a desperate place such as the Eastern Cape, you say, well, I'm prepared to close my eyes as long as I'm going to get a job.
I want to refute that fact, because I think it's inaccurate to say that the Western Cape is racist. I think racism is everywhere.
But there are
the Kamanzdorp
organizations that have done research in this area, and they have said black people feel out of place in the Western Cape.
But if you go to Mpumalanga, the Human Rights Research Council has indicated that there are new levels of racism that are on the go. I'm not here to deny the fact that there's elements of racism in the Western Cape, but I'm also willing to say that there are elements of racism everywhere else in the country. And we must deal with the illness of racism right at its core. We must ensure, when you look at government policy, and ensure that there is no sense where there's an allocation of resources that is equitable and in fact favorable towards communities that are poor. So I think it's not a fundamental policy of us. It's a principle of saying racism is a national pandemic.
And again, I think the important point you're making when it comes to allocation of resources, racism mustn't be seen in that prism. It mustn't be seen there.
And isn't practiced at all. And that's why I'm citing the example of the fact that we've invested quite heavily. I think even if you went to our communities where informal settlements, the process of formalization of informal settlements is highest within the Western Cape rather than any other province. When you look at the process of infrastructure and transport development, there's better. Because here's another way. When you think about Joburg, for example, how do we combat racism is to create access points for people to get access to one another in combating our apartheid legacy of separation. The best way to do that as a justice issue is to ensure that we actually provide a transport network that gets people access to one another. And we've invested heavily in making sure that our transport mechanisms give people opportunity and access to one another. So from a government policy point of view, we've systematically worked harder at making sure that we combat the structural effects of racism.
And the reason why we're discussing these things, Ralph, is simply because everyone has said and everyone knows that the DA has had a problem penetrating traditionally black communities and black voters in the past simply because of the relationship. People see the DA as a white organization. How then, in your view, do they turn that around? How do they change that perception?
I mean, this is exactly why we tend to focus on the Western Cape. And the reason why we focus on the Western Cape is not because we want to point out the weaknesses of the DA, but it's because the DA itself has taken the Western Cape as a kind of a model of governance that they should, that they have continued to package themselves as the party that stands for. And if you look at the Western Cape, the greater challenge they have is the duality of the Western Cape. You've got a sea point side, which is thriving, and other areas which are thriving very well. And the reason why those other areas are thriving very well is not entirely because the DA is extraordinarily capable, but it's because in more affluent suburbs, the economic system is capable of taking care of the situation there in most cases, like it is the case in Johannesburg, in some of the affluent suburbs of Sandton and all. The structural problem seems to be bare in your Gugulethu and your what you can call your traditionally black township, where if the DA is going to emphasize that it stands for a progressive model of governance, you want to look at how is it performing, particularly in those areas. Talk about social cohesion, for example, in Western Cape. I mean, that's quite a challenge. I lived in Western Cape for a couple of years, and what you have in Western Cape in terms of the social cohesion and the way in which people cohere or fail to cohere in the city, you've got a particular group of people along racial lines confined to a particular space, and you've got particular people confined to a particular space. My question there, or my concern, is how is the DA going to communicate to those people who feel they are on the outlier, the outskirts of the city? And to be able to communicate to them, you have to go beyond infrastructure, for example. You have to be able to learn to have a discourse that will engage those people. And you cannot escape the question of race, I think, in this particular matter.
Undeniably, there's a process that's already ongoing at the moment. In fact, I was with the Minister of Economic Development in the Western Cape, and they've instilled a program where they're engaging communities in terms of a dialogue about racism. And I think there's an honesty in terms of saying, let's have a discussion about it. I think that furthermore, we must be able to have a frank conversation about saying, wait, when you look at, besides the issue of infrastructure spend, when you look at social upliftment in terms of communities, because I think when it comes to the issue of the restoration of the dignity of our people, so that I stand first and foremost as an individual, as a South African, as a black South African who is proud, without feeling that there are structural issues that undermine me, we have to ensure that in those communities, Gugulethu, Langa, etc., we deliver services. And I think it was the Cocta report that seek to argue to say that in terms of access to water, in terms of access to electricity and sanitation, those issues are in place. So that when we enter the discussion table, we enter with our dignity still intact as human beings. And so I think those are fundamental issues that you need to be able to put into place so that the discussion about racism actually emerges out of a healthy place rather than one that is also unequal. Furthermore, when you look at our BEE spend, when you look at the metro such as Cape Town, and when you look at the municipality of the Western Cape, over 70% of our allocations actually go to previously disadvantaged individuals, which we are placing forward the argument to say that when we do the allocations, we must empower people so that they come on board as human beings who are fully empowered, who are business savvy. But we don't want to stop there. We've equally in our 8% growth policy project have argued quite strongly that actually there's a broader business savvy that is out there that's not just dependent on government? How do we make sure we empower those entrepreneurs to go through the processes? I mean, we do things like the red carpet system so that we try and deal away with red tape so that an entrepreneur can come into the space to be able to compete, so that we create individuals who are empowered. Because our ideological perspective is to say we're an open opportunity society, which seeks to say that let's create the best, a society that is open for all, so that people can compete equally and fairly, and ensure that we give them the best service we can get them. So.
All right. Just perhaps to add on these comments, because the newly appointed or elected DA leader here in Gauteng, John Moody, said in an interview before the Weekend Congress that what would be necessary is that the DA needs to gain trust and respect of the voters that you need to attract, and that can only happen if you are on the ground championing their issues. You need to show that you care and that you will make a positive difference in their lives. And I think that's the issue. Is the DA on the ground championing these, or are there contradictions? Let me take, for instance, issues of economic transformation. Is the DA championing those needs, those wants of the people on the ground? Because they want economic transformation.
But that's the point I'm making in terms of our allocation of resources and tender. I mean, when you look at the metro such as Cape Town, the tender budget is quite heavy, and when you put it at about 70% going towards black-owned individuals, it seeks to say that we can see transformation take place at every level economically. More importantly, I think also it's about the provision of infrastructure. You know, government can do what government can do. We mustn't deny that there's racism in the private sector. We mustn't deny that there's racism in every other aspect of society. We mustn't deny that. But we must accept what are various roles that they can come into place. And my fundamental position is to say that what government can do in terms of dealing with the issue of racism is about ensuring that actually people's services are being provided at the level that is right. I mean, we've championed the cause of ensuring that languages are protected at all across, which is key to somebody who's on the streets.
But the DA has certain problems, some may argue. For instance, let's talk about the labor broker issue. Here you had people in Johannesburg, thousands of people coming out and saying this issue for us is an important issue, is a critical issue, because it makes us feel that this is slavery all over again. But the DA has got to protect the interests of the entrepreneurs, so to speak, by saying, well, no, wait a minute, not the labor broking, leave that issue alone. This is what I'm talking about when I'm saying championing the issues of the people that you want to vote for you.
Regulation is a principal issue. The private sector, in that sense, requires regulation. When you then make a broad sweep statement to say, let's undo labor broking, you are also asking for thousands upon thousands of South Africans to be unemployed. What level of care are you talking about in this instance when you undermine that process? We are saying that regulation in terms of contract work must be brought on the table. We are saying that let's engage labor and business to ensure that the contractual agreements between those two parties are in place. And we're not in the defense of the private sector or business in this regard. We're in the defense of making sure that people are gainfully employed, they are brought into the economic strata, and the best way to be able to do that is to create regulation that is fair. But to then say, let's do away with every process of labor broking is actually asking to shoot yourself in the foot economically in terms of a high unemployment rate.
But if we're talking about championing the needs and the desires of the people on the ground, that's what they want.
But Xolani, when we then sit and I engage somebody in the township who says to me, I want for there to be, I'll use another example. Let's take away water meters. Let's take those things away because water meters and electricity meters make us pay. But here's the problem. When you take away a water meter, you are abandoning a resource which is progressively becoming scarce, as is the case in Johannesburg. When you take away an electricity meter, you are abandoning certain things. So at the same time as engaging the cause of the people, we must champion it with understanding the sustainable impact in the long run.
Okay. All right. We will be opening the lines then on 0891104208. Lots of emails, lots of SMSs. We'll read them out for you. Lots of Facebook posts as well.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
All right, lots of reaction coming through on our topic this morning. Let me just read one or two SMSs here. It's possible, given the fact that competition is stiff and the existence of coalition politics. That's Joni in Witbank. Another one says, the people who keep voting in the ANC deserve the bad service that they get. The DA produces Cape Town is a perfect example in the meantime. Sipo says, why vote for a government who we all know is filling its own pockets and lying to the public? Give the DA a chance. Race does not matter. And there's an SMS as well that says, one can't help feeling terror of a possible DA rule in future. DA handover of power was started in Polokwane, actually. Another one says, ANC voters have the same blind loyalty and ship mentality as the National Party voters during apartheid. Let's take perhaps an email or two and then take a call. There is an email that came through from Chris Kenny, who says, the DA seems to forget that its strategy for voters in the Western Cape, has, elections after elections, been centered around getting other parties to form coalitions with them. Hence, you have had an ID leader being mayor of Cape Town. That strategy is unlikely to work in Gauteng. It is unfortunate that they read a lot into results of by-elections, forgetting that such do not have any much hype and other considerations for the employed to vote. That's Chris Kenny Mugone who sent that email. Sandile Zungu says, I do not need a political home. I need service delivery. We are trying to be politicians. All we need here is service delivery. Another email came through from Olisi Mhluzi. The new black generation knows nothing about apartheid. The ANC cannot use the apartheid card on them. They grew under ANC government. They've not seen service delivery. They do not have blind loyalty towards ANC. Olisi Mhluzi sending that email. Another one from Lidwaba, Veli Lidwaba actually says, the constitution of the Democratic Alliance allows leaders and public representatives to push policies which can deliver without going to Congress. These are some of the emails. Let me take one or two calls, then come back, get comments from my guest. Chaos, Margate, good morning. Is that Chaos? Hello.
Koos.
Ja, Koos, hoe gaan het?
Yeah. I spoke to you when I was still in Howick. I'm now resident in Margate.
How are you, Koos?
No, fine, thanks. And you, Dolani.
I'm very
I
good.
like you very much.
Thank you.
Now,
Go ahead,
listen,
Koos.
I'm not attached to any party whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of things that I want to raise.
Yeah.
It will be very difficult for the DA to make more inroads because of the century celebration of the ANC. They keep their struggle figures alive, number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, as far as the Western Cape is concerned, they are encountered lots of problems because of the people coming from the Eastern Cape into the Western Cape, which makes it difficult. Mm-hmm. The main issue at stake is people must forget about the struggle and see things as happening right now.
Okay. Koos, I thank you in Margate. Thank you very much. Let's go to Eric Ekaelicha. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning, Mr. Kolani.
Hi.
I just want to make a few comments.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you take a look at the province of the Western Cape, out of the 10 departments, the majority of the HODs in those departments are white. The strategic advisor to the premier is a white male. The provincial HOD is a white male. The spokesperson of the premier is white. The majority of people working at the office of the premier are white. Now let's go to their policies and their constitution. The DA does not support the quota system. The DA is a liberal movement that believes in a free state economy. They are not considering the historical divisions of our past, and they are saying that everyone must be treated equally. Now, if you take a look at the ANC support the quota system, but they are saying the quota system must not be used to undermine merit. And the ANC support the affirmative action, where those that have been previously disadvantaged are getting more benefits. Now, if you take a look at Helen Zille's government, ever since she's been a premier in the Western Cape, there is not even one pilot project such as Khayelitsha Hospital, which she brings to black communities. Khayelitsha Hospital is not her project. It's the project of the ANC. And then if you take a look at Khayelitsha Court, Khayelitsha Department of Home Affairs, those are the project of the ANC, not her.
All right,
she
Eric.
just inherited from the ANC. Thank you, sir.
All right, Eric and Khayelitsha, I'll get Mr. Maimane to respond to you in a second. John is in Midrand. Hello, John.
Hi, Kolani.
Hi, welcome.
Yeah, I think for me, what is important, I want service delivery. I mean, really, I've been in the struggle before. And if the DA can come to Johannesburg and make sure that our traffic lights, they work, that I get a proper bill at the end of the month, and there's no e-tolling for me going to work. And when I go to hospital, I get the medications that I need, and my kids go to matric and pass. That's the government I want. I think that the ANC's failure, in a way, has actually entrenched racism, because there were people who believed that we will be like any other African state when they take over power in this country, and they're living to that prophecy. Obama makes Black Americans very proud today, and they can walk tall like Mandela made us feel in this country. But the current crop of ANC leadership with corruption and all of this, really, I mean, the racists they're getting an upper hand, and that's not a DA problem. That's actually an ANC problem. It's a national problem that's pervading the whole, and because of poor quality leadership within the ANC.
All right.
That is, that really allow corruption to fester, crime to fester, gangsterism to fester. What does that got to do with the DA? I just want
John.
service, and that's all.
All right, John is in Midrand. Thank you very much. Luther also in Midrand. Good morning, Luther.
Good morning, Xolani. Thanks so much.
Welcome.
Just a quick comment from me. The issue about DA winning Gauteng, I think it's not even a topic that you should waste time on, because DA knows that they're not going to win Gauteng. They shall never win that in any time.
How do you know that?
Okay, for the following reasons. We know that DA is a typical is a reformed apartheid, is a reformed national party that does not believe in land distribution. So according to DA, everything must stay the same. Black people who are in the township, in the periphery, must just be given little water and little electricity. They must be happy, because that is how apartheid thought black people are. So they don't believe in land redistribution.
When you say we, though, wait, let me ask you this question.
They don't believe in affirmative action.
Yeah.
They don't believe that black people must also be given an opportunity. So they are saying, let's move from where apartheid was, which was giving opportunities for whites, and let's move as if there was never apartheid. Let's go on and give everybody the same opportunities. We know, Xolani, that...
Again, I'm going to ask you a question about we, because you say we. Does that include the almost 1 million people who voted the DA in Gauteng in the previous elections? You see, you must understand that some people voted them. When you say we, who is we?
We is the people of South Africa who supported the ANC to remove apartheid system, of which DA was part of that apartheid.
But upwards of 3 million
DA
people...
is a product of a national party. DA is Democratic Party and National Party combined. When the National Party decided that, look, we can't continue pushing racist attitudes, DA stayed, because DA said, no, we want to continue to push racist state. We want to continue to push the status quo to remain. We want black people to stay in the periphery and just to be happy with the crumbs, when the white people who benefited many, many years ago should continue to benefit. They don't believe in affirmative action. So according to them, it's wrong to give black people opportunities. They don't believe in land distribution. They don't condemn racism. They are the products of racism. The racism that is the Western Cape is a product of DA. And you can go on.
Okay,
Helen Zille, that is my last comment. Helen Zille, just to show how DA operates, when they took Western Cape, the cabinet of Western Cape as a province were white males. All of them were white males.
Okay.
The last caller spoke about every white person running DA. Now, how can you talk about affirmation? How can you talk about DA being the party of the people?
Okay.
DA is not the party of the people, and our people knows that.
All right.
That is why they'll never vote DA.
Okay, Luther in Midrand, thank you. Tabiso Soweto, good morning. Tabiso?
Xolani, I'd rather have a white male, a white competent male than to have a corrupt ANC member, I'd rather have a white male than to have an ANC run, at the Sahara office of the Gupta. Do you understand? Colin, the reason why the DA will make it is because what we are seeing now, we're seeing the ANC becoming a KZN affair, I mean, you see the people who are opposing the Youth League, for instance, is Duma Dlamini, Malusi Gigaba, Clayton Zimande, Jacob Zuma. So people are beginning to see the dictatorship of KZN, run through the Sahara, offices of the Guptaization or Guptification of the ANC, if you like. So I think, Colin, I need service delivery. I'm tired of this historical, history that we are being fed. Actually, ANC did not liberate us. South Africa was liberated by the civil society. Both black and white people, organizations were involved, So the mere fact that ANC managed to occupy the space and then run this country doesn't mean that they've got monopoly on the liberation of this country. We need change, Xolani, and we need change now. And then we need, majority of the people, Xolani, who are ANC members, it's a big irony that they're staying in the municipality that are run by the DA, I mean, look at the man with an iPad, for instance. That man with an iPad, he doesn't have a constituency, and then I think he stays in a municipality that is run by the DA. Do you understand? So, change, Xolani. Is what people.
All right, Thabiso, I thank you for your call. Let me go to Funani, East London, before then I get comments here on the studio. Good morning, Funani.
Good discussion, Xolani. Greetings to your guest.
Much
you
appreciated.
see, many people do not see that there is no difference between the ANC and the DA. Many of your callers would argue that the DA is putting males, forgetting that the ANC is putting only ANC members who happen to be black. When people argue that there's racism in the Western Cape, they forget that not so long ago ANC was in charge of the Western Cape. Was there no racism then? Is there racism now that we have the DA? I'm a member of AZAPO. I'm not a member of the DA. But I'm saying that this country, with either the ANC or the DA, the same. One of your callers argued that the DA was a product of the Nationalist Party. Where is the Nationalist Party now? It died in the ANC. So the ANC and the DA, they have something that put them together, which is the Nationalist Party. Finally, there was a study conducted in 2011 by the United Nations Habitat. It was an international study where they were looking at the most unequal cities in the world. In this country, they found that the most unequal city is East London. And if you go down, you find Joburg, and Cape Town was further down there. And it was very interesting for me because I thought that Cape Town, because of what the media and analysts are telling us, will be the most unequal city. It doesn't matter. The ANC and the DA represented the very same elite who are very close to it, not the majority. I stay in a village, Poland, and I see people around me, they are not going far in the ANC-run municipality.
Okay.
So the same would happen in the DA.
Funani, in East London, I thank you very much. Ralph, you've been listening to my callers, obviously also monitoring the emails and SMSs. If this were to be a snap survey, what do you think people are saying?
I think people are skeptical to some extent, and then there are those who are frustrated. They're skeptical about the DA making inroads into your black constituencies. But there are also people who are seeing, opportunities. There are people who are reducing everything else to a question of service delivery. I just want to take a step back and talk about an ordinary voter, for example, in Tembisa or in Soweto, and I'm not talking about a middle class. I'm talking about an ordinary voter there who the DA, I think, should be gunning for if it wants to make those inroads. And I think when I look at ordinary voters, we tend to underestimate their level of sophistication. I don't think that ordinary voters go to the ballot booth thinking only about service delivery, Xolani. I don't think that is the case. You look at the voting patterns in South Africa, they will vote for a councillor today. After 3 or 4 weeks, they will go express grievances against that councillor and all. What that shows is that when people vote, they are not just thinking only about the infrastructure and the road and all. And I think what the DA needs to be careful, if it really wants to make inroads, and if it doesn't want to be reduced only to a party that gets 1 or 2 wards to solve the problem of service delivery backlog and it ends there for them. If they want to make a real imprint in Gauteng as they say they want to, they must go beyond that, because I've had experience in certain municipalities where I chat to people will say, we have a DA councillor, we just want to be able to solve the problem of service delivery backlog. We are ANC. That shows that there is a certain language that the DA is not speaking to those type of voters. And that shows that the party needs to go beyond the discourse of service delivery. When people are disgruntled, they usually voice their concern on a single issue. But the DA need to understand that it cannot be reduced.
Mr. Maimane, your responses, please. I mean, there was a guy like Eric Nkailich who was pretty critical of the record of the DA in the Western Cape, especially in the townships. Luther, very much critical of what the DA has done.
I think let me respond to a number of issues. The first one is the composition of leadership in the Western Cape is an ongoing transformation issue. To say that Helen Zille, spokesperson, is white is uninformed, because it's not. He's black. And to look at other portfolios that he writes, he must actually have a proper look at what the racial balance looks like, and then begin to understand that the process of transformation is ongoing. And it speaks to one of our greater pillars. And I think to add your comment, which is to say that there are broader issues, I think we must accept there's a Mandela legacy that's been abundant here of a diverse society. And as the DA, we're seeking to build that. Rather than saying, let's discuss, have a conversation about replacing one race for another. Let's rather focus on a diverse society in all its facets, not just race, not just sex, but in all its facets. And so one of the pillars we've anchored ourselves on is to speak about diversity. When it comes to the second issue, Luther, I find Luther's comments totally misinformed and actually deplorable, to use that language, because when he starts to speak about the fact that we've been poor on the land issue, when you look at the facts for themselves, there's been more land redistribution in the Western Cape than in any other province for that matter. When it comes to the issue of the reform of that land, there's been brought up in municipalities, in governments that we govern. We are able to implement policies that seeks to enhance that process. When you look at the national footprint, you can accept the fact that the policy is slow and it hasn't been working, and we've lobbied in Parliament as early as last week to say we must accelerate that process. So Luther's comments are coming from a place that maybe rewinds backwards and is not really speaking about what the current reality is and what the facts on the table are. And then in terms of the issue of the National Party and where it seeks, I accept. But I must also remind listeners to say that there are more National Party ministers in the ANC than there are anywhere else. So I think we must be able to put these facts into context and understand. And then finally, the comment I wanted to make was to say that when it speaks to the fact that we need a national identity, we need a sense that seeks to say to us, the second agenda that we've put on the place is to say we can focus on the issue of reconciliation. And we've spent an enormous amount of time saying, how do we focus on that and have a fair conversation as South Africans? We're saying, let's have redress. So it's fundamental to our policy position to speak about redress. When you look at our economic model, redress is a fundamental of it. It says, how do we take resources and redistribute them equitably?
Okay, let me read some emails, read some SMSs as well, and then we'll get some concluding remarks. We're coming up to 9 o'clock. There's somebody who, in fact, it's Israel in Randburg, who says, may I advise Mr. Maimane about the following ANC achievements? Soweto today is a marvelous green suburb. Cosmo City is flourishing with possibilities. Build, ANC, build. Johannesburg Stock Exchange is still 33% owned by black people, and the DA is at the helm against economic transformation. This confirms that the DA is still dreaming and out of touch with reality. Our people cannot be fooled by childish politics and fault-finding exercise. Israel from Randburg sent us that email. Po also sent an email. Okay, this one is about the Deputy President and not necessarily about what we're talking about now. There is one, though, that came from Begi Gama. It says, DA is racist for brainwashed people who don't believe there is racism in the Western Cape. I wish to debate Musi or Lindiwe on these issues. Midrand is not attended to since the stormwater damages. Streets, roads have been washed away. Houses and perimeter wall fallen. DA councillors have not pitched up since the 21st of February. What DA will take over from the ANC? It's a pipe dream. And that is Begi Gama. Couple of Facebook posts. Jabu Shilwane says, I have learned recently that you must never say never. If they play their cards correctly and the voter is fed up enough with the ANC, they can actually pull it off. Masho Mohale, DA and ANC were neck and neck during local government elections, which serves to prove that they have increased their support base massively in Gauteng. There is much likelihood for DA to take over based on that trend analysis. It's no longer about liberation from apartheid, but from poor service delivery. SMSs, it's no coincidence that the best-run province in the country is the one province which is governed by the DA. That's Colin. Lungile Ntusi on SMS says, let them govern the provinces. That would at least force the two parties to work together. If that doesn't work, then let's make the IEC be forced to choose an interim government in 2014. Kwandiwe Nongauza says, if the media portrays the taking over of Gauteng by the DA as being possible, it will only scare the black population into coming out in numbers to support the ANC. Those are some of the SMSs. Let's quickly hear from Raymond in Soweto before we wrap up. Raymond, good morning to you. Oh, Raymond? All right, problems with Raymond's line. Sorry, Raymond. I think, unfortunately, we can't continue with that particular line. Ralph, let me start with you. We're wrapping up now.
I think that the mere fact that we are even discussing this, I think is of great interest to South Africa, that, there could be a possible shift of voters from the ANC to the DA. But I think what needs to be looked at is that it's not just a numbers game, and the DA and the ANC are not the only two political parties in South Africa, and they do not only offer political space in this country. There are other small political parties that could capture some of the voters that the DA would imagine that those voters need to automatically go to the party itself. And I also think that the party also need to work on activating disgruntled voters who have just lost interest in voting and all, but still feel like the DA is yet not an option. And I think the party also further is that they should acknowledge one thing that they are not confronting, the risk of losing their traditional constituencies as well.
Talking about
those who would be angered by
sure.
the DA trying to speak the language that appeals to your black voters and that, and they need to contend.
Sure. Talking about voters who have lost interest, there's this SMS that I would like Mr. Maimane to respond to, together with, of course, what you're saying. This SMS says, "This is so tedious. It's like two boys in the playground comparing the size of the..." Finish the sentence for me.
The constituencies.
Yeah.
Well, I think I think, to be quite fair, Xolani, it isn't really about that. It's not. It isn't really. I think sometimes when the ANC, it serves the ANC, they distance themselves from the government they put in place, and so you have these contradictions that are taking place all the time. So Lindsay Mavabi fighting against the secrecy bill, yet some of his ministers sit in parliament and they voted in. So there are all these contradictions that are taking place. These actions of a movement that is in tension within itself. I think if I was to wrap this conversation up, I would say, as a black South African who's from Soweto, I must answer the question always as to what does freedom mean. At one level, freedom does mean achieving the right to vote and to be equal before others. At another level, freedom does mean that you have an access to opportunity, and you can tunity, and you can tunity, and you can tunity, and you can tunity, and you can tunity.